But today what I want to do is, if we go to the next slide, today what I want to do is actually a number of things. I want to kind of like start by sharing my story. I will tell you a little bit of who I am, what I try to do in life, and then the different ways in which kind of like I try to do those things. I will also kind of like share my thoughts on youth activism, also around youth work, because we can use youth activism or youth work interchangeably. And I've been in youth work practice literally for the past 25 years as a young person, as still somebody who's active in practice, but also somebody who is on the other side of teaching, researching, and writing about youth work and youth activism. I will also start to talk about the global interconnectedness linked to the SDGs that we have, but also in a particular field that I have come to specialize in called global youth work. And the whole purpose of global youth work is how do we work with people to provoke consciousness and also support them to take action. So I will also share one or two models or conceptual models about that. But most importantly today, I want to focus on pedagogies of disruption and also pedagogies of hope. In terms of pedagogies of disruption, how do we do things in a different way from the way we've always done them? But also, how do we generate hope so that people would actually have the energy to get out of bed, to be able to engage in something that they can believe in? When people have hope, they can be alive. They can look forward to something. When people don't have hope, they don't get out. So how do we generate pedagogies of disruption to change the way things are, but also how do we turn that into pedagogies of hope in terms of how do we give people hope to keep on doing what they're supposed to do? So if we move on to the next slide, I will just show you a picture. And you can see that I have, just to tell, because I'm going to share my story. I'm going to tell you a number of things, likely from a subjective point of view, because it's from my point of view. So I want to situate myself. I want to tell you my positionality, where I'm coming from and who I am, so that my views would actually make a lot more sense. On the left hand of your screen, you probably would see me. I'm bending with a wheelbarrow. And this was when we were building a library in a small village in the Gambia called Mandouar. And I work with my students, we raised the funds. I mean, after asking the people what they wanted, we built a library. So for me, my studies, my work is not only about sitting in an ivory tower and just talking about things. It's about practically taking action to change people's lives. Talk is cheap, action is harder. So how do we actually change? How do we transform the world, not only with our words, but also with our action? So as one of my colleagues earlier we were discussing, I'm a poet because poetry allows me to write from a particular perspective, to see the world in a particular way, but also it is quite therapeutic for me because I come across so many things that are so wrong in the world that make me so sad, that makes me angry, that makes me frustrated. And obviously you cannot go around hitting anybody. So poetry allows me to use the words to actually get things out of my system, but also to see the world in a different way. So I write mainly, I've done about 6 books now, and most of them are academic books. I'm a farmer. At least I've got a big farm, and I like farming because I think that's quite exciting in terms of sustainability and also growing what you eat and eating what you grow. I think that's really good. But most important to this lecture is also about the fact that I'm a scholar activist. So for the past 16, 17 years, I've been teaching at Montfort University as a lecturer. I've also been an activist for the past 25 years or more, where I've worked with communities, I've worked with young people, and I want to see myself as a scholar activist. I'm not only a scholar who's interested in the production of knowledge. I also consider myself as an activist who's interested in changing the world. Yeah. So I want to move away from that ivory tower, and I want to actually look at how the things we talk about, the knowledge we produce, and how we come to configure things can be changed in terms of how people not only know, but also how they be. So I like that interaction. I think if I was only a scholar or an academic, I'll be bored. If I was also only an activist, I'll be bored. So I like combining these two positions of being a scholar who's able to understand the world, but also an activist who's able to change the world. So I think that's why it's very, very important that we talk about these two things. So if we look at the next slide as well, then you will see that an activist researcher, and here I'm using it to situate as a scholar activist. An activist researcher, according to Hale, is somebody who understands the root causes of inequality, oppression, violence, and related conditions of human suffering. And as young people, the mere fact that you've joined Amnesty or you're working with Amnesty is a very political act itself, because you are taking a conscious decision to stand up for something. And here, I would assume you would be in line with what Oxfam said, that a global citizen is somebody who's morally outraged by injustice. So I'm assuming that there is a lot of moral outrage in a number of the people in this forum, but this is actually in response, is an act of resistance against inequality and the massive inequality where 80% of the world resources are controlled by about 20% of the world population. And we can go on around health, around housing, around education, around life expectancy, about child mortality. The list is there. Yeah. An activist, again, we need to make the point that is carried out at each phase from conception to through dissemination in direct cooperation with an organized collective of people who themselves are subject to these conditions. And here I'm quite interested in participatory methodologies, in participatory way, in liberatory way. You remember Paulo Freire's conversation that there is education for oppression, but there's also education for liberation. So how do we work in liberatory way, where people who are affected by the problems are at the center, at the heart of the change that we seek to bring? So and I will talk about young people later, and I want young people here to be at the heart of this conversation. And the last point is that it's used together with the people in question to formulate strategies for transforming these conditions and to achieve the power necessary to make these strategies effective. So again, it is not about coming to people and parachuting in and bringing about change. It's about working with the people, from their understanding of the world to actually bring about the change that we seek together with them, And later on, I will share something around the participation ladder, which will illustrate this point better. So if we go to the next point, next slide, I want you to think, just take about 30 seconds and think about this. Think about the three quotes. One is our world has reached a critical stage. Children no longer listen to their parents. The end of the world cannot be far away. B, children today love luxury. They have bad manners, contempt of authority. They show disrespect for their elders and love chatter in place of exercise. Children are now tyrants, not servants of the household. And quote C, you pass by children just dismissed from school and listen to the conversation of half-grown boys and observe how even girls push people from the sidewalk, you will admit the outlook is very sad. Just think, who would say these kinds of things? And when were these things said? Just think for a few seconds. What about now if I show you who said these things? Would you be surprised? If we go to the next slide, we will actually see. So one of them was a quote by an Egyptian priest in 2000 BC. The other one was a quote from Socrates, the Greek philosopher, in 400 BC. The third was John Locke, the philosopher, in 1693. But when I read those quotes for you, you thought that these were said yesterday or last year. But these were said hundreds of years ago, probably thousands of years ago. Yeah. So I wanted to show you that young people often are constructed as causing trouble, and therefore they need to be stopped from causing trouble, or they are in trouble and therefore need to be rescued. And this has been happening over thousands of years. And I think the challenge for youth has always been how to change the narrative. So if we look at youth work, for example, it is a way of working with young people. But I want to talk about two things. I want to talk about youth work as an art, as a profession, as a practice. But I also want to talk about youth empowerment, youth activism, where young people themselves start to do these things. So if we start with youth work as what youth work is, Kerry Young, who is one of the writers that I have a lot of respect for, and wrote a book called The Art of Youth Work. She said that youth work is actually an exercise in moral philosophy to get young people to ask and answer the essential question of self, of who am I? So in terms of how we work with young people, it is not about telling young people what to do. It's about supporting young people to ask and to answer that essential question of self, of who am I, what is my purpose, and how do I go about it? You know, in the UK, the NYA just released, the National Youth Agency in the UK just released a youth work curriculum, which has, and the 3 E's and the P's have been in existence for a long time. And they say that youth work is about the 3 E's, that is equality of opportunities, education, and empowerment. So it's about how do we provide equality of opportunities for young people? How do we educate them informally and experientially? And how do we empower them? And then the P is also about participation, young people's participation being key. That youth work is all about how we do all of those things. And I guess this is something that youth workers would do with young people, but what about young people doing it themselves? Our relationship about those things. But the other bit is also Bernard Davis, and I'll talk a bit about Bernard Davis later. He mentioned, he wrote a manifesto of youth work, because he argues that the voluntary principle, if you work with young people in schools, that is not youth work, because young people don't have a choice. If you work with young people in offending and they're in prisons and you're forcing them, they don't have a choice. But youth work is the only space where young people have a choice to take part in it or not to take part in it. And that's a very important distinction. So if we go to the next point as well, it will be interesting. The next slide, if we go to the next slide, which is about defining youth. The National Youth Agency said that youth, as in this state of mind, you know, is the adolescent's developmental phase between childhood and adulthood that brings significant physical and emotional challenges. The brain undergoes huge physical changes during adolescence that impact on behavior, self-image, social interactions, and decision-making. It is also an important time for making significant life choices and decisions, experiencing increasingly complex social interactions, and dealing with a digitized world. And I think when we talk about psychological perspectives on youth, there's always talk about a period of storm and stress, you know, that people experience neurological, physiological, you know, psychological, you know, changes, philosophical changes even to their lives. So some people even argue that it's that state of confusion where you're not any longer a child, but you're not a fully formed adult, and you're in that physis, in that stage of transition. Obviously, it's not chronological, it's not dependent on age. Maturity depends on so many other factors. Yeah. You know, in the past, people used to leave their houses by when they were 18, and now some people are still living in their houses with their parents until they were 30. Does that define youth work? And or is it situated within context and within society? So youth, there's so many different, the UN talked about it being state of mind. In some countries, youth is under 18 or under 21 or under 30. In some countries, the definition is much wider and much broader as well. So just to go back to Bernard Davis in the next slide, you know, he talks about, if we were talking about youth work or the way we work with young people's voluntary participation, young people are not forced to take part in this. They take part because they chose to. But when we talk about youth work as well, it's about tipping the balance of power, because normally adults have the power and young people have the power under. And I think in terms of youth work, his argument is that youth work must equalize the balance so that young people become more in charge of what they do and how they practice youth work and the actions they take. And the adults, their power and their influence and their participation gets less and less, while that of the young people rise more and more. And I think it's very, very important, because if you bring a group of young people and you just tell them what to do and you don't give them any space, any wiggle room, then is that really youth work, or is that something else? You know, so obviously there's a bit about penetrating on stimulating environments so that young people get challenged. We get what we call generation of curiosity, so that they're excited to learn, to grow, to do different things, to challenge themselves. But also it's about the territory that young people are in. It's not about coming into a particular youth center or a particular school or a particular building and said, young people must come here. How do youth workers go into young people's territories? Not only the physical, but the emotional territory as well, in order to be able to engage with them. How do you get into their spaces? Not only how you get into their spaces, but how do young people invite you into their spaces so that you can work with them? Yeah. So let's move to the next slide. So, and I think when we talk about young people taking part in activities, in events, there is this model where you say, for example, stage 1 is about just making initial contact with them. Stage 2, you meet with them regularly. Stage 3 is about where they socialize. Stage 4, they take part. Stage 5, they're involved. Stage 6, they actually organize it. And stage 7, they lead it. And I guess as youth work, as young people, where are you within all these stages? When your youth workers work with you, when those who promote youth activism work with you, do they place you at stage 1 or stage 7 or stage 4 or 5? Where are you in all of this? What level of responsibility are you taking in terms of making these things happen? Yeah. So I have just talked a little bit about youth work because I wanted to just introduce youth work. I wanted to introduce maybe globalization. And then I will probably introduce a little bit about global youth work. Then I will share with you the things I've done, not only what I'm talking about. Just think about this. You might have seen this quote, but I like this quote. And it's a bit old, but I still like it. Because what's the difference between Tanzania and Goldman Sachs? Obviously, as George argues, one is an African country that makes 2.2 billion a year and shares it among 25 million people. The other is an investment bank that makes 2.6 billion and shares most of it between 161 people. And I think I wanted to demonstrate the fact that there is almost a democratic deficit, and the democratic deficit is where governments usually are accountable to their people because the people could elect them and the people could sack them. But now that is not the case because sometimes multinational, transnational corporations are more powerful than actual governments. And they can decide where jobs go and what happened in a much bigger way than before. So it is very, very important to understand that power has been shifting, due to, some people would argue, globalization from the people to transnational corporations. And that's very important to bear in mind. Because if you look at what is happening in terms of underdevelopment, in terms of inequality, in terms of structural violence, where young people who are born in one part of the world are not likely to have those opportunities to education, to long life, to health, to housing, to education, to all of these things. So where you're born from determines the lottery, that ticket that you win. So there is a lot of struggling, the refugee situation, the lack of medication, where I have grown up and I see people die because a number of them just could not afford the medical bills on a daily basis, where you see children go hungry because there's no food in the house and every night they have to go hungry because, there's a lot of exploitation, there's a lot of corruption. So there are so many things that are wrong with the world, and I guess you know it better than I do. The question becomes, in Slovenia, in Ljubljana, what are the issues that confront our young people? And what is it that we can do to change the way things are? Because we're not bystanders, we're not spectators, we're actively involved in our lives. So if we go to the next slide, I always ask myself, what is it in my youth work, in my practice? What is it that I am trying to do? What is it that I'm working towards? And I like the UN definition where it says that human development is the expansion of people's freedoms to live long, healthy, and creative lives, to advance other goals they have reason to value, and to engage actively in shaping development equitably and sustainably on a shared planet. People are both the beneficiaries and the drivers of human development. And I think if you're a youth activist, if you're a freedom fighter, if you are a supporter of amnesty, what is it that you're trying to do? And at the end of the day, when everything is done and dusted, what would you have wanted to achieve? So for me, this is important as a guide for development. to understand what is it I'm trying to do and what it is I'm trying to achieve, because it guides me, it shows me what I'm about and what I work towards. I'm quite clear. I want to build a better world. But what does a better world look like? And this human development definition is quite important in guiding me to do this. Okay, so let's move to globalization. If we go to the next slide, you will begin to see that, I mean, in my work, I look at globalization as a process in which the interaction between people and countries and nations is getting much closer. I think Corona is a very, very powerful example. You know, before that, we were moving and we didn't even understand the connection sometimes, you know, that exists between us and other people. And now we can see how much our interaction depends on other people. Where time and distance are no longer constraints to instantaneous interaction, we having this conversation would not have happened at some point in time. But now we're having this instantaneous interaction, which is cheap, which is available. So time and distance and space are no longer barriers to our interaction. And we have to understand this. What happens in other parts of the world inextricably affects what happens to us. Also, it means that local and national boundaries are no longer the primary boundaries upon which we interact. It also means that everything that we do, every personal, every local, every national, every global action has an interactive response to what we do and how we are. Okay. So that's why, if we look at the next slide, I talked about this model of the 5 phases and the clinks, and I'm placing young people at the middle. And you've got the political dimension, the economic, the technological, the environment, and the cultural dimension. So the political dimension is about what is right and wrong, about human rights. You know, when George Bush went to, when Vladimir Putin at that point and said, we want Russia to be more democratic. And apparently Vladimir Putin said to him, is that the kind of democracy that you exported to Iraq? You know, and so what does democracy mean? And what does human rights mean? Because these are not universal values that everybody necessarily signs up to, but these are defined from particular paradigms and particular perspectives. If you look at the culture, what is beautiful, what is right, what is wrong? You know, what does a beautiful person look like? You know, these are, you know, what does it mean to be cool? You know, these are things that are espoused and diffused through global norms that we come to accept. The environment, the technology, the economics, and finance, these are all linked together. So how do we get young people to understand the personal, local, national, global links between themselves and, for example, the economics? So, you know, my survival, my life, how is it linked to the global economy? Culture, the Nike I'm wearing, the Gucci, you know, and all of the stuff I'm wearing, where is it coming from? What is my concept of a beautiful person? Is it to be slim, or is it to kind of like to be big? And what does that mean? And where is that coming from? So globalization affects us in all kinds of ways. And if we go to the next slide, you will see that in terms of global youth work, I'm arguing that the practitioner, or here the young people, intervene in a group of other young people's constructed reality. And how do we then actually get them to invite us into their world? Not only to invite us into their world, but to have a dialogue about what is right and what is wrong and what is good and what is bad and what is just and what is unjust. So how do we get that? And that process for me, if we go to the next point, I will show you, is what happens. So how do we provoke consciousness? Yeah, and if we engage people, and this could be through food, through cars, through fashion. It could be something that we can talk about, but using youth work methodology, it can be something that can be done in so many different ways. So how do we engage young people either in the individual level or also in the collective level to actually provoke consciousness, to get them to see the world in a different way from how they're used to seeing the world? But if we provoke their consciousness, then how do we also get them to take action? Because it's good to see the world in a different way, to almost wake up from a deep sleep. But when you see the world in a different way, what do you do to change the world? So that is one, provoking consciousness, getting people, getting young people, getting our colleagues, getting our friends to see the world in a different way around justice, about inequality, about violence. But once we do that, how do we get them to change the world? By taking practical actions at the personal level, at the local level, at the national level, and at the global level. And I think this is something that I will want to kind of like share with you in terms of what I have done in a few minutes. But if we go to the next slide, we'll begin to see that the North-South Center were very clear that it is important to make the links, that is important to make the personal, local, national, global links. My experience growing up in the Gambia, because I spent the first 22 years of the first half of my life in the Gambia and the second half of my life in England. My experience of growing up in the Gambia, in an African country, and also having lived for the past 22, 23 years in the United Kingdom are completely different. And I think it's important that when you look at how you situate yourself, it is important you understand the context, you understand where you're coming from and where the other young people you're working are coming from. But it's important to analyze the events and also to make those connections. I think it's really, really important, both at the micro and the macro level. So now I just wanted to share that a little bit, and because I know that I don't have a lot of time, and I know Petra has warned me very seriously not to go over time, you know. So I just wanted to share that I told you about what I do in my professional life, but also in my practice, I set up Global Hands, which is a social enterprise in the UK and a charity in the Gambia. And I just was tired of all the problems happening in the world when I go to different parts of Africa, but also when I come to different parts of Europe. I saw immigrants being chased in Spain who were trying to make their lives, their living. I see young people I know in the Gambia trying to cross into Europe using the Sahara Desert. And when they go through the Sahara Desert to try get into Spain and end up in Lampedusa and all of those countries in Greece and Italy, you see the bodies floating in the Mediterranean sometimes. And you ask yourself, what is it can I do to make the situation better? You see people you go to hospitals that have no medication, no qualified staff. You see people die because they just don't have money to do anything. You walk in different parts of Europe, you see homeless people. You ask yourself, what is it you can do depending on what your situatedness is? So what I wanted to do was to set up Global Hands, because I'm not a spectator. There was something I could do to change the world, and I set up Global Hands. So, and we wanted to focus on, so I just got about four other people and said, listen, we need to get together and change the world. There's a long story about what happened, where I ended up crying for about 3 days and 3 nights in order to come to the realization that I needed to set up something. So in Global Hands, we do education and public engagement so that we can provoke consciousness and we can support the people to take action. We do international development, how we support people across countries to bring about change and development. We also publish books, because when I was going to school, a lot of the history I taught was about Europe from European eyes. It wasn't about Africa from African eyes. So when I had the opportunity with Global Hands Publishing, we promote views from the South to make things understood from a different perspective. So these are some of the things we do. So just to go to one of the things, the next slide shows you what we call a Global Hands Development Hub. I work with students from the UK and also young people from the Gambia, and we built this place which can house 35 people, and it's got we use it as an incubation center where when we have ideas, we work with people to make those ideas and to bring them into reality. When I started this project, we did not have 1 penny. So all the money that went into building this project, we raised the money ourselves. We did fashion shows, we did runs, like Run for Africa, we call it. And we did whatever, car wash, whatever it took to raise the money, because we didn't want to wait for anybody to give us the chance to get the money. We just said, we will get the money. And with or without support, we will make this happen. So we also built a library, which at that point was the second biggest library in the Gambia. And then it's built with, the center is also built with sustainable bricks. Normally, when you build normal bricks, you get 35 bricks from 1 bag of cement, but you use a lot of sand, which is causing environmental degradation and all kinds of problems. But also the cost of importation is so high, importing the the cement. So we actually use the compressed earth brick machine to build these buildings, as you can see. And it is something that is an incubation center that is now in the Gambia. I think we started building it about 2014, and I think by 2016 or so, it was ready, but we raised the funds ourselves. If we look at the next point, that's still, we've got a big hall and we've got a lot of facilities, and the place also kind of like generates income to keep the project going, so that we don't have to go and look for money all the time, but we bring in that sustainability into the project. So if we go to the next point, because I'm aware I'm running out, so I'll just try and go as fast. We also organize Gambia development schools. We've taken maybe about 600 people from Europe and America to our project, and we spend about 10 days to 2 weeks with them and teaching them so many different things. Where they're standing is called the Never Again statue, where we actually, it used to be one of the main areas where they transported slaves. And if you look at it, across the river, we got James Island, and you can go into the slave ships, slave houses, where they used to have slaves. If you look on your left, during the era of globalization, the Portuguese, Spanish explorers, Vasco da Gama, Alvisto da Mosco, and all of the Christopher Columbus, and all of those people were going around trying to conquer the world. So they built one of the first churches in Africa, in the Gambia there. And, you know, I don't know whether some of you have heard about Kunta Kinte, but he was supposed to come probably a few kilometers away from here. So we just take students to teach them history in a practical way, you know, rather than tell them about theories, we teach them. But the good thing is, like, the money that people pay actually allows the hub to keep on going, so that it generates its own income. But also students from all over the world can come and take part in this project and be able to volunteer in a project that makes a difference. But also they learn. For example, they stay in a village for 24 hours and they eat and drink and go to the toilet like an ordinary villager, which actually transform their whole view of the world. So if we go to the next stage, I've talked about Global Hands Publishing, which is about just promoting views from the South, which are often, as the Susa would argue, seen as credible or visible in terms of kind of like how reality and normality is configured. So we publish a number of books. If we go to the next slide, we could possibly see the books. Yeah, so we've published about 12, 13 books that tells the story from the African perspective. And we also operate a journal, which is like an academic journal that tries to produce knowledge, because how things are configured need to be disrupted. Because when Ngugi wa Thiong'o talks, he says that the greatest destruction to Africa wasn't about the looting and the raping of the land. It was about the looting and the raping of the mind, so that we come to see ourselves in other people's eyes. So don't underestimate the power of the narrative. And this is where we're trying to disrupt through our work with Global Hands. And also some of our books now are being used as core textbooks in the University of the Gambia, which I think is what we wanted to do. And then if you go to the next slide, you can see the compressed earth brick machine. This brick machine, if you wanted to buy the automated one, it will cost about 300 pounds, no, 3,000 pounds. Now we were able to build one for about $400, and we've built an automated one as well, which uses clay and readily available compressed clay, which can actually be converted into bricks. And then when the environment is really hot, it's very cool, like an air-conditioned room inside, because it maintains temperature at room temperature. So that's quite important. But these are the kinds of things that we actually produce in this innovation hub that we built in the Gambia. So if we go to the next one, we also tested the proof of principle, because a lot of, like, about 60–70% of mangoes, they get rotten in the Gambia, because when mango season comes, we don't have the facilities to dry them or to preserve them. So if we could set up this company, it will get young people who do not have jobs into jobs. Not only that, but also it will allow people, in terms of the UN SDG about sustainable and food and all that kind of stuff, it will allow them to do that as well. And here, the next one, normally to have the solar dryers is very expensive. So we work with some of our engineers from UK and also some of the local carpenters, and we've built these solar dryers so that they can dry these mangoes and other food. Because between May and September, there are lots of mangoes, but after that, there is no more mango. And these mangoes are full of like good nutrients that can stop malnutrition. So we actually developed these solar dryers in the innovation hub with young people. Most of the things that we do in this hub are with young people. 90% of them are with young people, and putting young people at the center of the changes that we want to bring. If we go to the next one, I just want to, because I would like to have more conversations from you, but this probably is the last slide, then I will keep quiet and then we can have a conversation. But the whole point is that, how do we bring all of these things together? And I wanted to give you myself as an example, because I am interested in research, in teaching, in training youth workers. I've been teaching youth workers for the past 16 years. That's what I've been doing in the university. And I've been a youth worker for the past 25 years or more. So what are the things that I'm bringing along? I think the key cornerstones of my practice, what I will call my principles, are that co-production, that it's not only me who can do things. How do I work with people? When I wanted to set up Global Hands, I looked at 4 other people who had different skill sets that I didn't have. One was good at finance, one was good at mobilizing community, one was good at marketing, so different things. And I brought the team together. So how do we work together as young people? As a young person in the Gambia, I serve as the president of the Gambia Students Union. I serve as the youth director of the National Red Cross Society. I set up an organization called Youth Association for Advancement from scratch. So I know what I'm talking about, and I have done these things. But based on this experience, it is important that you actually take an approach that is participatory, that is about co-production. You involve other people, you work with other people. I'm also a troublemaker in that I like disruption. I don't just accept the way things are, because if we accept the way things are, there will never be a change. I don't want to use disruption as a dirty word, but disruption to change the way things are, to change the supply line in order to change the way that things have been configured as normal. To do that, you must be able to think differently. You must be able to disrupt. And hence I talk about pedagogies of disruption. How do we make it sustainable, not only from a green environment and according to the SDGs, but how do we make sure that when we're gone, our projects will still be able to survive? In building the development hub in the Gambia, I focus a lot on financial sustainability, because when people come, they give money to projects, and then when the money is gone, the project fails. How do I build the sustainability of the project so that even when the funding withdraws, this thing can still go on? Then we work in a very digital world now, and you have to factor that in. The apps, the mobile phones, the distance that you need to cover through digital interconnectedness. You need to be able to use that, again, with technology, again, with who's got the knowledge, who's done what, how can you use them, again, with counter-orthodoxy spaces, non-traditional spaces, how do you generate them? How do you support them through a process of youth work? So it is important that we understand globalization and its interconnectedness. It is important to understand that youth work and work with young people is different from other ways of working with young people. It is about education, as Paulo Freire would argue, for liberation. It's about provoking consciousness so that those people most affected, and young people in this case, are able to take action, are able to get a new consciousness. It is very, very important. But also, beyond talking, what are the concrete actions? I am saddened, I am saddened when I see certain things happening when it comes to human suffering, when it comes to inequality, when I come to structural violence, when I see oppression. It makes me sad, but I want to do something about it. And Global Hands has been my way of doing something about it. Now I want to challenge you. What is your issue, and what is your way of doing something about it?
Hello again.
Hi.
Thank you for the speech. I enjoyed it really, really a lot. I actually started to think about my own engagement in school with the young people, and I have maybe it's a strange question, but I'm gonna go for it. Would you say that there is a difference in objectives? So what youth activism aims for across the globe? Does it differ? For example, would young people in Europe strive for something different compared to the youth in Africa or Asia? Or what is your thought on that? Because sometimes I have a, that's my own preconceived notion and prejudice, actually, that youth in the West, is better off in a lot of respects. I don't know. What would you say?
Mujaski, I think that's a very important question. And I think there are two answers to your question. One is that all young people, regardless of their geographical location, are interested in finding themselves, in defining who they are, in building a future. So therefore, in that way, they're all the same. But I find out that sometimes the focus of youth, I mean, I've been a youth worker in England here for a long time. And the issues I face as a youth worker in England and the issues I face as a youth worker in the Gambia are different, And I think for here, it might be linked to education, or it might be linked to kind of like certain social activities compared to sometimes in some African countries about employment, about education, about daily bread. But I think, so there are, depending on the situatedness of the different young people, they face different issues. But in terms of young people struggling, in that period of storm and stress to find themselves, as Kerry Young said, to ask and answer the essential question of who I am and what I'm about, I think they're similar. But each country is different. Sometimes it's about employment, sometimes it's about education, sometimes it's about safety and violence, sometimes it's about war, sometimes it's about migration, sometimes it's about disease. So I think there are so many different things. And I think every young, even when if I come to Slovenia, different parts of Ljubljana itself, different young people will have different issues, whether it's the rich young people or the poor young people, or from different neighborhoods and access to school and all of these things. And I think it is very different. And that's why no two group of young people are the same, because they always have their own context and their own situatedness. So yes, I agree with you that in a way they're different, but on the other hand as well, it's just about the struggle for self.
Mm-hmm. I have another question.
Okay.
Because I often see that activism has actually become the so-called collectivism. Mm-hmm. I'm sure you're familiar with the term, right?
Yeah.
So we feel that we already do something good if we, I don't know, click on this link and sign the petition or something like that. But I feel that still more action is needed. Mm-hmm. And sometimes I feel that, I don't know, if the youth don't feel inspired because they think that, okay, if I sign the online petition, I've done everything. Or I don't know, this is just my, how to say, thoughts on concerns regarding real action activism, not just collectivism. I think nowadays it has been reduced to collectivism. Maybe I'm wrong, because that's just my opinion, the way I see it.
Yeah. That? Yeah, I think I mentioned here how we can be morally outraged about the things that are going wrong. And I think sometimes we ask ourselves, is that enough? Yeah. And sometimes, people are involved in certain things because it's a fashion accessory. Mm-hmm. Like you want to have the latest iPhone, so therefore you look cool. You want to wear the latest Adidas or the latest Nike, and that makes you look cool. And sometimes collectivism, activism can look cool because it gives you street credibility. Mm-hmm. So for some people, it's like that. And I think sometimes it can be quite tokenistic, both from the giver and those who are giving it. So that's why the title is about how do we go beyond tokenism. But on the other hand as well, you need to think about, for me, global youth work, which is about youth work engaging with a global dimension, is about provoking consciousness. But when you take action, it's about action that is commensurate with your ability. You know, so sometimes people are able to do more, and sometimes people are able to do less. As a reaction, I remember one of the global youth work projects we had with YMCA. A young person was able to write a letter to their MP to protest about something. Is this less valuable than actually making a big campaign that results in change? What is in the power of that young person? You know, like Red Nose Day in the UK is a big thing. It's a big charity fundraising event. A group of young people from a primary school wrote to them and said, "You're trying to protect the environment. Why are you using plastic to buy these red noses where everybody wears them and raise funds?" And then this red nose, which is like massive because you have got a whole day on TV where all the schools all over the country, they're now seeing that they're changing from producing plastic-based red noses to something that's not plastic. Because you talk about millions of those red noses possibly being sold.
Yes.
So is that less valuable in terms of activism? So for example, I work with young people who did a Run for Africa, and they went and they built a library where young people can go to. Is that more valuable? Which one is more valuable? And I think this is quite important, because what is it you can give, and what is within your power, and what is commensurate with your ability? I think that is quite important, because if you try to do something that you cannot, like I know people who said, I'm going to go and change the world, and they didn't go to school, they didn't go to work. How are they going to survive themselves? What kind of activism is that? And I think this is the conversation that needs to happen. Like, I know that I have got my full-time job, but I've always done my work with Global Hands on top of my full-time job. And I'm not as young as I used to be. And now I get tired so much more. And I'm just asking myself, am I going to kill myself? Am I going to die before I can prove to myself I've done enough activism? You know, and I think this is the kind of stuff that you need to regulate within yourselves and see what is it. But also, it's very easy for me to condemn other people that they're not doing as much as I am doing. But sometimes I ask myself, maybe they're in different situations, and maybe their condition is so much more different from mine. And me, for the past 20 years, I've just done so much activism without any pay. My work with Global Hands is voluntary, because I set up Global Hands because I wanted to make a difference. But now I'm finding that I'm really struggling to do all the work with Global Hands, to help with the publishing of the books, to take students to the Gambia, to organize conferences, to organize. One of the things that I didn't put there was, like, we took Africa's first solar powered taxi after negotiating with Nissan in our project. So we've got a solar electric car in the Gambia running, testing the proof of principle that we can use these electric cars. But when you do all the negotiations, sign on the contract, and the security are calling me saying, oh, what's happening? The driver is not paying the money. The manager is complaining there. People want to do something. And this is different from my full-time job. And I just think I cannot. So what is it that you keep people off, and what can you do? I think you got to ask yourself that. Otherwise, you might just drop dead from doing too much.
Yeah, I see your point. Thank you.
Thank you.
If I'm correct, I've seen a raised hand a bit earlier, but I forgot who raised it. So if the person can do it again, because I think I've seen that hand.
I see him. So Vito, right? You can ask a question.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Hi, Dr. Salah. Thank you very much for your lecture. I enjoyed it very much. I'm going to ask you a question that I've already asked you before when we had the Zoom meeting a couple of months ago. So you talked about interconnectism of the world. And so what do you think of the world being one country? Could it work in the future?
Yeah, I think the world is already functioning as one space where who holds power, because who holds power is important. You know, who's got the power to actually make the decisions and to enforce those decisions, and whether, like, through capitalism, which is based on a very extractive process of making profit at all costs, whether capitalism has a heart or a soul, and therefore cares about people who are in difficult situations, or is more interested in profit. Because if the dominant world order is about making profit at all costs, then the question becomes, can it be an equal world? I talked about the democratic deficit, where Goldman Sachs and Tanzania had the same income, and who's making what decision for who. So yes, I think it's good that me and you are sitting here having a conversation instantaneously without even a second delay to our conversation. We talk about being able to travel all over the world at a shorter period of time, being able to connect with people at a shorter period of time, being able to interact instantaneously, to have access to, like, I don't need to go to the Library of Congress to see the books. I can now log online and I can see everything that I need to. So this digital kind of like revolution, it's quite good in that it gives access. You can have the youngest person in a village in Africa be able to go on Google and download information that can allow them to build a wind turbine or to do something else. Because knowledge used to be hoarded. Knowledge used to be kept in particular spaces which were not accessible. But now knowledge is actually becoming more accessible. So there's so many good things about this global interconnectedness. But on the other hand as well, you're talking about like how tech giants are using our information. When you put on Siri, do you know how much information is being collected about you and your movement and your habits? Has it ever happened to you where you're just talking about something? Oh, I want to go and buy this, and suddenly you get an advert on your phone talking about that thing. Do you know how much? So it is quite interesting that at no point in human history have we had so much access to interconnectedness. But at the same time, at no point in human history are we more vulnerable to what others. There's the issue of fake news and targeted marketing on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram, and all of the kind of space where, even what you see is controlled, even though you think that you're controlling what you see, you're controlling what you see, but you're not doing that at all. So yes, I think in a nutshell, it is beautiful that there is so much interconnectedness and instantaneous interconnectedness, but it's also a dangerous place. So I think it's better, and I think it should be used for the better, but unfortunately, not everybody has that intention.
Thank you. That's a fascinating answer. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Vito.
Andre, yes, please.
I was just wondering, before you mentioned that we need something to give us hope to get out of bed, to try and change the world, if I'm not mistaken. I was really wondering, what's the thing that you strive for? What's the thing that keeps you going to wake up every day, to try and change the world? I know you mentioned inequality, and it's probably something regarding that, but could you be more specific?
Yeah, I'll give you two examples. I think around 2011, I went to the Gambia with my students. I took about 25 students on my youth and community work course. We went there for about 10 days, and we went to one of the villages, because I wanted to see the real world, not the tourist bit. We went to one of the villages, and I think about 59% of the people were described as very poor, and about 30% as poor. Poor means not having more than one meal a day. So you could imagine what very poor means. That was by Action Aid. It was one of their projects. And we were there with the students, and the students were scratching their head, why is this? And then we sat down with the village elders and we were talking. And one of the village elders was asked by one of the students, why are you people so poor? And the village chief said, oh, it's an act of God. God bestowed poverty on us, and there's nothing we can do about it. And there was so much hopelessness in this person's voice and attitude that I left very sad. And when I get upset, I cry a lot. So it affects my street credibility. So don't tell anybody. But the whole point was that it kind of it made me really sad. And I went to bed and I cried. And I think after a few months, I went to Nigeria again. And then I was there, in a 5-star hotel, sitting there doing stuff for my university. and then meeting with students, telling them about how great my university was, and And I think I was in this hotel, and they did not encourage us to get out. And I was there for about 5-6 days, and I felt restless. I said, I'll just go jogging on the beach. And I went running about 5 minutes from this 5-star hotel. And I saw poverty and squalor like I've never seen in my life. You know, it was just like little cardboard houses, people sleeping there on the beach, and people getting on the beach. I just saw stuff like, and I like to say to my friends that for 3 nights and 3 days, I just cried. I really cried, you know, and it was like, because it was like, how is it possible that human beings can experience this, that it is okay for people to be in this kind of situation? And I think immediately I came back from Nigeria, I was like a man who was possessed. I just went about setting global hands up in designing the logo, in designing the infrastructure, in defining our objectives, in registering a bank account, building a website. I have never built a website, but I built the first website of Global Hands in terms of publishing books and the struggle, because we were saying that this problem is not only a problem of the hand, it's also a problem of the head, because it's not only about what people are doing, it's also how people conceptualize the world. And if we don't change the way they see the world, we cannot change the way that they interact with the world. And you know, I was born in the Gambia, and I've been to so many other different African countries and European countries. And my struggle is not only about people in Africa, it's about the human condition. When I walk across London or in different cities in Leicester, or in Lisbon, or in Paris, and you see a lot of homeless people, and you see a lot of problems, you know, you ask yourself, is this the way that it was meant to be? And I think that almost anger, you know, kind of like, it drives me. And even though I'm not as young as I used to be, and I get a lot more tired easily, but I am still kind of like, I still want to build a better world. You know, I cannot help everybody, and I cannot give money to people. But what I can do is to build the institutions, because a lot of the institutions are about giving aid to the people, giving fish to the people. How do you build the capacity of the people to fish for themselves? And that has been my focus. It's not about coming to give money. It's about how do I work with people to build their capacity, to build their ability to solve the problems for themselves. So when I remember these stories, you know, it makes me sad. I was in Ghana a couple of years ago, and I just saw a woman in the market carrying a big basket, selling from day to day, and would not probably make more than €2 in the whole day. But this is a story I've seen in Uganda. It's a story I've seen in Senegal. It's a story I've seen in the Gambia. It's a story I've seen all over the place. So what is it I'm going to do? When I see stories of mothers putting a boiling pot, like a pot on a fire, and boiling it, and the children will be asking for food. And then the mother will tell them, you know, the food is going to be ready. The food is going to be ready until the children fall asleep because they don't have anything. And the pot was empty. It was just water. So when you see stories like this, it makes me angry. It makes me morally outraged. And this is something that I try to do in my poetry. And also in my life, I try to do what I can to build. I am fortunate in that I was able to get the education I was able to get to. And it's not normal for people like me to be where we are. And I want to use that opportunity to do the best that I can to build a better world. So where I come from, I see these stories every day. It is actually embedded in my psyche. So I don't have a chance to forget these stories.
Thank you.
I think that, sorry. I just wanted to thank you. I think that's a great answer. So it's about building the people. Thank you.
So I already have a next question for you, and it's coming from an attendee who's commuting right now, and therefore I'll read it out loud. She's wondering where can she find your poetry, and she would probably like to read it.
I think it's on Amazon. I think my books are on Amazon. My books, like I said, I was in Ljubljana, I think a couple of years ago. That's where I met Petra for the first time. I was in Ljubljana, and I came to launch my poetry. My last poetry book was called The Dictator and the Heretic. And it's about the dictator is society who tells you what to be and how to be. And the heretic is the person who doesn't believe in the norms of society. And it's just somebody who just wants to challenge everything upside down. So that's why I try to, in my poetry, write a lot about the struggle. So my poetry is quite angry. I think I've only written, in this book, I've only written 2 poems that are about love. Everything is about struggle and blood and sweat and tears. So yes, my poetry is available. It's on Amazon and most of the other bookshops.
Okay, and I've seen a link posted in a chat leading to your poetry. So
yeah,
thank
you.
Who's got the next question?
I just saw there's a question in the chat. I will read it out loud for you. So what effect do you think the COVID situation has on activism? How does it affect the ways activists work? And how does it affect our attention to problems and our willingness to fight for a better world?
Wow, that's quite, thank you, Eva. I think that's a really interesting conversation. And I think COVID has just totally dismantled the way that the world has been. And I think forever it will change. I think we're still yet to understand the impact of COVID. But like in my university, we just have to transform all our teaching. 80% of our teaching is happening online now and not face-to-face. And so I'm working with teachers to actually calibrate and recalibrate ways of working digitally and online. And I think the world has to change to that. Like instead of having an office in a physical space, as an activist, you can have a virtual office. So you need to think about how do you develop a virtual office so that your office is your laptop or is your iPad or is actually your phone. And how do you connect with people digitally? How do you support people? Not everybody's got the digital capability or even the digital literacy to engage. So the world has forever changed. What we knew yesterday is never going to happen again. And it's going to change in so many ways that businesses will be more mobile, more nimble. People are having to work more from home, and activism must also find other ways of engaging. I mean, I think the youths have been setting the trend through Twitter, through Facebook, through Instagram, and through all these spaces to engage. Now, I think the question becomes, how do we engage with the people that we want to work with in digital spaces? You know, how do we do that? How can they respond to that? Maybe the people don't have the digital capability. Maybe they don't have the access. Like I'm working on a project in the Gambia, and one of the saying, oh, we can give everybody a laptop. I said, okay, if you give everybody a laptop, people don't have the connection, or even the connection is not good enough to sustain a video call. So how are you going to do that? So it's about understanding where people are coming from, but also how do we engage with spaces that are interactive, that are different, and that depends on every single situation. But yes, it will affect our ways of engaging. And I'm not sure that I've got a list of 1,000 rules to do the online engagement, but I think it is something that can be negotiated with the people that we work with. But I think it's a brilliant question, and definitely it affects us. And definitely we as activists must find other ways, other creative ways, more disruptive ways of engaging with our traditional communities.
Okay, thank you for that answer. Do we have another question? You can raise your hand now. Okay, I have then another question. Oh, okay, Mitka, you can go first.
No, actually, I wouldn't want to take your time, because this is youth. So you can go ahead, and then if we have time, I will have a question, okay?
Okay, thank you. So I wanted to ask you a two-part question. So first one, is it, it's like, when was the time that you figure out that you want to work in that field? So with the youth and the whole activism, was there like a specific situation or event, or was it just like the way you were raised and the way that your childhood went that you figured out that you want to work in that field? And then the second one, so was there ever a time when you felt like so helpless with some situation that you felt that you want to stop doing that, when maybe it was time to change your field of work, and like anything regarding that?
Yeah, I was just thinking that I wrote this in one of my poems. I was thinking whether I could look at it, but I cannot. Maybe it will take too time. Maybe I'll look at it again. But I grew up in an environment where I was coming to my I grew up in an environment in the mid 1980s where the IMF and the World Bank actually we're saying, the World Bank and the IMF, when they go to a lot of these countries, they tell you, you must devalue your currency, you must stop state subsidies. For example, one of the subsidies was that if they had what is called price control, the government used to give a price for every commodity so that it will not get so high that people will not be able to afford it. So if the IMF and World Bank come into your country through through a lot of their conditionalities, one of the conditions might be that the state must remove subsidies, because capitalism is about letting the market forces dominate and dictate what happens. Socialism is about the state interfering in some of that to control it. So when IMF and World Bank intervened, they told the state to remove the price controls so that the market forces will determine, and the market forces do not have a heart or a soul. So because the price were going so high up, some people could not afford basic food, basic commodities. They were also told that they could not actually kind of like keep on paying, subsidizing health, that people have to pay some money towards their health. And the health was, the hospital, when they used to go there, it was free. They were told that, for example, there are too many people in the workspaces, and you have to actually cut the workforce by 50% or by 25%. And the money is too much, let's devalue it so that it will only be able to buy half of what it used to buy. So when these conditionalities were hitting, and I was growing up, maybe in my, being about, maybe about 6, 7, 8 years, and I saw those things. And I saw what was happening to my people. And I saw the problems. And by the time I was 12, 13, I have read a lot about society. I've read some of the books about colonialism, about independence, about nonviolence. I read about all of these things, and I joined a lot of societies. If there is anything that I could tell you, is that you have to go and join societies and engage in activism. I've got my PhD now, but I have not learned 10% of what I have learned from my activism in my PhD. I learned so much more. If you talk about my knowledge, studying up to PhD level and doing my activism, 90% of my learning has been on my activism instead of my PhD. And I learned how to deal with people. I learned how to analyze. I learned how to situate issues. So when I was growing up, I saw so much suffering that I wanted to make things better, And when I look at the best way in which I could make the things better, I had to learn to go into youth activism. So that's why when I was young, I was one of the youngest president of the Gambia Students Union, where all the students in the country were in a union. I was the youth director of the Gambia Red Cross, which had a lot of ownership all over the place. So I was joining these groups, I was learning, I was growing, but I was also seeing the problems. I think by the time I was 12, 13, I already made up my mind that I'm going to be a youth and community worker who's going to work with people to make the changes, because this was in your face. The struggle was not something you read in books or in theory. The smell of the shit, sorry for my language, but also the blood that was oozing out was something that you saw on a daily basis. You didn't have the luxury to switch off your TV because you didn't like what was on TV. This was life on a daily basis that you have to deal with.
Okay, well, thank you. That's really inspiring.
Thank you.
So do we have Mitka, yeah, you had a question, right? Yeah, you can go ahead.
If there's not anyone else. Hi, yeah, I was wondering, and yeah, this was so powerful. And it reminds me of Amnesty motto that we have to take injustice personal, and then obviously great things happen. And I don't have actually a question so much as a comment, and I would like to, hear what you think about it. Because one thing, when you were talking about disruption and you were talking about the global and about the issues, I was thinking about Greta Thunberg, because she was disrupting a lot. And on the one hand, she really managed to do a lot. Obviously not by herself, she had the whole movement, but it's very powerful and very important. But then again, and here I'm kind of playing a devil's advocate, you know, how successful was she? Because, you know, she was like ultimately disruptive, but then was she neutralized by, you know, becoming everyone's lost child or youth? And so we were just kind of, you know, yes, you know, there was a lot of hashtags and a lot of photo opportunities, a lot of awards, but has anything changed? So how to go beyond this? Because I'm not saying that it's not worthwhile. I'm just thinking like how to gain the momentum and keep the momentum in such disruptive activities that are obviously needed.
I think that's a very powerful question. You know, I was joking with one of my friends because about 2 weeks ago, I was asking myself, I don't know whether I had a midlife crisis, I don't know, but I was just asking myself, after all the efforts I've put in, what have I gained out of it? What have I been able to transform? And I was saying to myself, I haven't made as much impact as I thought I would, you know, because the changes that I wanted to happen are not happening. But also I'm aware that the system is a beast. And if you poke the tail of the beast, it's going to come back at you in all its ugliness. And it's going to try and take you down, because the system, that's the way the system protects itself. So I don't think the system is going to just let you disrupt it and get away with it. It will find ways of countering you. So I'm much more aware of that now. But I think it's about what is within your control, because I think I forgot who, but somebody asked it earlier. Are we in a state of paralysis where the problem is so big that we cannot even begin to move because we're scared of not being able to make any impact? You know, I was about a month ago, somebody just called me to say, Momodou, thank you. I said, why? He said, oh, when I was a youth worker about 25 years ago, you gave me this advice. I said, okay, that was good. But he thanked me and he was so grateful. I didn't even remember him, but it must have been the impact of what we did together that was quite transformative for him, because according to him, it allowed him to change. When we talk about change, we can talk about change at the personal level, at the local level, at the national level, and at the global level. And that's why when I was talking about when we provoke consciousness so that people get a new understanding, at what stage do we start to take action? I can change myself, and I can change my consumer habit, what I eat, where I go, how I fly, and what I accept and what I don't accept. But at the local level, if I'm the only one, if society is working on its head and think it's normal, and you're walking on your feet and they say you're abnormal, who do you believe? But these are the questions, Medgar. I think you asked a very fundamental question that we ask ourselves. Is it like doing this work, is it just about even doing a masturbation to feel good about yourself? Or is it deeper than that? You know, is it more meaningful than that? And sometimes you ask yourself, what I'm doing, is it big enough? But if all of us lie down and die, is that a better solution to the problem? So I hear your concern, but we can start taking action at the personal level, then maybe at the local level, maybe even at the national or structural level, and at the global level. And how much change we make depends on how much we're able to come together, how much we're able to not only work within our own localities, but to build alliance from across the world to bring different forces and different groups of people together. You know, I sometimes put my hands on my head and just say, because I've got a farm in the Gambia, my dream is just to go and retire on my farm and just maybe insulate myself from all the problems of the world and just read my books and go to sleep and eat some organic food. You know, that's my dream. But there is so much that is wrong on a daily basis that we cannot afford to give up, that we have to keep on trying our best. And sometimes our best is not enough. And sometimes it will take a lot longer. But we have to build the alliances, bring in the right people, and be better than what we saw before. But I agree with you that it's not as easy as that.
Thank you. So we have now one more, I think we have time for another question, and it came from the chat, so I'll read it. I'm interested in your opinion on how would one start with activistic movement? How would one become a youth activist? What small actions does one have to make to start the change? What do you consider an activistic action?
Okay, Neza, yeah, Neza?
Nija.
Nija, okay, Nija, okay. I think it's all start with yourself, and it's about working on yourself. If you can work on yourself, you have to be clear what you are about. You know, this is not about just doing it for one day and just putting it as a fashion accessory, like I've got a new phone, I've got the latest designer, and then you go away. I think you need to work on yourself, and you need to be honest with yourself. What is it you want? And you're willing to put in the time and the effort. I also find that there is lifelong learning. You know, Neza, every day I work with young people. Every day I go on a project, I learn, I grow. And it's like I get a high, because when we do a project and it's so powerful, I go away with the biggest smile on my face, because it's like you've changed lives. And I think those things are good, but I learned. I have to be open to learning. I have to be willing to listen to people. And I don't have all the facts. I don't know everything. In fact, I know so little that I should spend all my life learning. And when I work with young people, I see them as co-producers of knowledge. I don't have the knowledge and they don't have any. We are all learning from each other. So as an activist, one of the key things is like, I am open to learning, yeah? Because I don't have a monopoly on how the world is. I learn from people. And sometimes I'm not sure about something. I go and speak to people who know. I do my research online or through the books. I look at what other people have done, yeah? But also, if I'm going to help people, I need to understand the people. I need to let the people tell me their story. I cannot just go away, lock myself in a room for 40 nights and 40 days, and then come out with tablets and say, voila, here it is. It's not like that. That's not going to work, because you do not understand the needs of the people. Even if you think you know the people, you do not know them. You have to ask them, what is it they want? You have to be constantly searching for knowledge, searching for competence, the skills, the knowledge, the values, the attitudes, improving yourself. When I look at things now, I'm just thinking, I've made some big mistakes. I wish I knew what I know now. But every time I'm learning, every time I'm trying to change, every time I'm trying to be better. So I think as an activist, you need to learn, you need to educate yourself, you need to look at opportunities, you need to have support network, you need to look at mentors who could support you, who you would talk to about issues, you know. But also, it's okay to make mistakes. It is okay. You need to find a safe space where you, like, when I was about 18, we set up like a big organization on youth and youth advancement and development. When I was about 15, I was part of the people who rewrote the whole constitution of the Gambia Students' Union. And I was just in high school. So you have to believe in yourself, but you also need to understand that understand the incomplete nature of your knowledge. You don't know everything. And the only way you can grow is to learn, you know. But also, this must be something you care about, you know, not something you want to just put on Snapchat or Facebook or Instagram and look how cool you are. It must go beyond. It must be able to go on when the lights are off. But yes, start with educating yourself. Start with making mistakes, because educating yourself is not only by reading books. If you're organizing something, okay, what are you about? You're about the environment. I asked myself, what am I about? What am I about? I said, I'm about building capacity so that I can make people's life better by supporting them to be able to gain the skills and the knowledge to be able to solve their own problems. Yeah. What is it that you're about? And what do you need to do? Do you need to set up an organization, or does Amnesty do it enough? And therefore, you want to just go and join Amnesty and do your bit, or do you want to create something new? Or do you want to do there was a time we were not happy with what was happening in the Gambia, and there were about 10 of us who just got together. I think some people were killed, executed, and we didn't like that. We wanted to create a better society, somewhere in America, some in Europe, some in Africa. We call ourselves, what did we call ourselves? We should call them some steady hands clear heads and steady hands, because we wanted to be careful about what was happening to the country. So we were having Skype meetings every Sunday. We were talking about strategies. We were working with people on the ground. So there are ways for every situation. You need to look at how much time you've got, you know. But I can assure you that you get into youth activism, the kind of education, even when you become a manager tomorrow or you get to any job, you develop people skills. You develop the ability to organize. You develop emotional literacy. You develop cultural competence. You develop so many things that books alone cannot teach you.
Thank you. So I know I said before, oh, sorry.
No, you go, you go.
I just wanted to thank him.
Oh, okay. So I said that was the last question and we're kind of over an hour, but if you don't mind, there was just one last question to ask. Can I?
Yeah, please, please.
Okay, so that one is, should people feel obliged to help?
I think that's a moral question. Thank you, Mark, for that. I think it's a moral question. I do not have a choice, because I see things that I cannot walk away with my clean conscience. But also, helping is beyond the moral imperative. The moral imperative is about doing the right thing. If young people are in your streets and they don't have anything to do and they start getting into drugs or crime, your house is not safe. Because so it's not only about what other people want to do or not want to do, but your survival is interconnected with the survival of other people. And you know, it's your choice. I will never ask you to help or not to help. That is a choice that you have to make. But is it obligatory? I don't know. For me, it is. I don't know for you, Mark. Is it?